Well, greetings, personal health and wellness. I wonder how many of you are starting this video and you're saying, I don't know why I'm even taking this class. I'm healthy. Or maybe there's a few of you who are wondering why you're taking this class because you're like, I don't really want to talk about some of these things because I got this going on or that going on. And it's kind of intimidating to think about, addressing that issue. Or maybe there's one or two of you out there who are like, I'm really excited to take this class because I want to learn about health and wellness. And for all of you out there with whatever experience you're having right now, I hope that you find this to be a safe but also a very productive and responsive place to be to pursue your own health and your outcomes. So let's talk about outcomes and very specifically what we're going to learn in this video. Number one, we're going to talk about longevity. We're going to define that and describe it. We're going to talk about what the difference is between the term health and wellness. We're going to talk about the differences in the terms mortality and morbidity. We're also going to discuss the 8 dimensions of health and talk about the relationship that exists between those. So as we start, I always like to kind of bring you some quotes, and I love what Joyce Meyer says here. She says that I believe the greatest gift you can give your family and the world is a healthy you. Now that's a big, bulky statement. We're going to unpack that probably a little bit today, but as we go through the whole class. And then our friend Naval here says, a fit body, a calm mind, a house full of love, these things cannot be bought. They must be earned. So as we think about that, we kind of put that into perspective across our life, and that helps us to understand the term longevity just a little bit better. Longevity basically talks about the length of life, but also the quality or your well living that you're going to have during that length of life. And so we want you to know, we want you to live long, but we also want you to live well. And that is a very big goal, but it also is one that is achievable, regardless of where you are at in your health journey today. So we look at this and we understand that there are 2 terms we're going to use in this class. Number one is health, the other is wellness. Health is really like a thermostat, or even maybe you could think of it as a measuring stick, or you could even say it's a thermometer, but it's basically telling you where you're at right now. And so you would think, okay, this first guy is having some back pain. The thermostat, or the temperature in the room, for him, he really wants to change it. And if you look over at the picture on the right, you see this young lady who is doing some pull-ups. And she's changing the temperature in her room right now. She's adjusting that to fit better and to be more comfortable because she's doing some work that's going to make her back stronger. It's healthier. And that is the active pursuit of wellness. And health is just simply not saying, hey, look, I'm not sick. It's so much more than that. It's more than the lack of disease. But then we also have to understand that we have to be intentional or actionable about pursuing good things in our health, and that is wellness. So one of the things that we also want to talk about is the term mortality. Well, that's death. That's something that we can't escape. It talks about our lifespan. It also has a big deal because we're all going to deal with it, but it has a bigger proponent over here on the right side, and that is morbidity. Morbidity tells us like how well we're living. It tells us if we have cardiovascular disease or diabetes or something like that that is impeding the best life that we could be living. And so we understand that the longer we can prevent a diagnosis, the longer we can prevent death. And that's really the fundamental and elemental aspects of this class. And we want you to prevent these things. However, we know that some people will eventually succumb to some certain illnesses or impairments. And if that happens, we still want you to do everything you can to mitigate the risk of death. But again, we want you to say, listen, I know the longer I can prevent a diagnosis, the longer I can prevent death. That is elemental. From that, we're going to tell you that you have 3 basic choices. So number one is you can take the ostrich approach, and that's sticking your head in the sand and thinking, you know what, I just can't do anything about it. And that's not true, and so we want you to know that up front. The other approach is you can be dependent either partially or fully on medicine and healthcare. And if you are, then what you need to know is that people who kind of fall into that category, they may live a little bit longer. Medicine does usually, lengthen life, but it doesn't always improve the quality of life. And so we're hoping that maybe you would look and say, there's got to be a better option, right? And so we're going to give you option number 3. And option number 3 is saying, listen, I'm going to seek wellness in all the dimensions of my life. And of those dimensions, I'm going to see that there's just a lot of good things. And so in that, we have to understand that these 8 dimensions that exist are physical, they're social, they're intellectual, they're emotional, they're environmental, they're spiritual, they're occupational, and they're financial. And so as we look at these 8 dimensions, what we say is, these have to interconnect. These have to work together. And that is the relationship that we want you to understand. And Zig Ziglar kind of did this best. He described it as a wheel. He said it all does work together like a wheel. And if you get a flat spot in the wheel, it's not going to roll very good. Before we go into that, though, let's just kind of talk about one other thing. Zig Ziglar also identifies family as a very critical component of your health. And I want to agree totally. But let's just kind of remember.
Mama said that. Mama said that.
Mama said that. Very fluid family relationship that we really can't address that as well in this class. And so we're going to defer that, but acknowledge still that that's an important part. But family does definitely bring in a lot to our values as well as the way we are actionable about our health. And so we'll leave it at that and move forward, but we will kind of touch back on that as we progress through the class. So back to this wheel thing. Think about a skateboard wheel and how, just because of use, it may develop a flat spot. And if it does develop a flat spot, it's going to roll kind of funky. You're not going to have a very smooth ride. And eventually, you could develop more flat spots. And if you develop more flat spots, it's really going to ride awful. And so that is kind of the wheel of those dimensions, is that you want to keep all edges smooth. But if you do get a flat spot, you do need to protect it. Otherwise, you get more flat spots, and then all of a sudden you may be looking at replacement. And that's not easy, it's not cheap, and it's usually going to cost a lot in the form of emotions and a lot of other things. And so we'll kind of address that as we go forward. You could also look at it kind of like the Titanic. Everybody knows the story of the Titanic. It was the unsinkable ship, but it sunk, right? And so it sunk because it hit an iceberg. Really, eventually you're going to hit an iceberg. It's just how much damage did you take, and were you healthy enough that you were able to repair that damage and mitigate sinking? Or also, were you paying attention to that and keeping it from affecting the other aspects, or maybe you would say the other components of your boat, that it didn't fill with water and cause the whole thing to sink? Unfortunately, icebergs are in our future, and rarely can we slow down or change directions in time, and we usually do whack that iceberg. And so if that happens, we have to be prepared for what to do. And so we want you to understand that there are 8 fundamental ways we can look at this. Number 1 is through your physical health. And this is kind of what everybody thinks of when they say health and health class, is they think, oh, we're going to talk about exercise and diet and those kind of things. Well, we're going to talk about those. But what we want to know is, or what we want you to know, is that physical health is kind of the number 1 thing because it reflects so many things. So first of all, it's about your body shape, and that's definitely size as far as height, but also width, and it also talks about functions. So think about your digestive system, your urinary system, your reproductive system, your endocrine system, all kind of coming in and making big plays at your physical health. But then we go to the next thing, and that's strength and endurance. Strength and endurance really is kind of what we most think of. We think of exercise and physical health, but there's more to it, right? And so the other aspect of this is kind of your resistance to disease. And that's talking about your immune system, but also your durability when or if you have an impairment possibly pending. And so the durability issue, that kind of really plays out in my profession of physical therapy. I look at people and, they're either doing something to get kind of healed up from an injury, but a lot of people are doing things because they have kind of a really strong morbidity, and they're really trying to build those strength and endurance concepts to make sure that they do live longer and they do live better. But there are three primary influencers we want you to know about physical health. Number one, it's your physical activity. That's like exercise, but also just things that you do to be physically active. And we'll talk more about that specifically. Another influencer is your diet. And then the final influencer there is your sleep. And we'll address each one of these components and bring them back in time into physical health. But also we're going to spread those out across those other dimensions. Number two is our social health. Now, one of the things that we want you to understand from the beginning is that social health is about your deep interpersonal, satisfying relationships, right? It's not about how many people follow you on your social media. It's about, the 3 or 4 people that you probably have in your life that are like your 3 a.m. friends, the people who will be there for you and are there for you. What we know is that there is a very unique thing tied to social health where if you don't have good social health, you may take your life, and that's called suicide. What we know is that it is a very increased risk when social health is poor. And so we want to value social health. We want to encourage it. We want you to make it a very big priority in your life, because personal health definitely involves personal death, and talking about that and getting that out there is important to me. The next thing that we want you to see is the Harvard medical study that talks about this being the single most important pathway to your happiness. We really enjoy life around people and community, and so we want you to share in that, but we also understand that that's tough and it gets harder as you get older. If you're a traditional age college student, 18 to 22, you're kind of at the pinnacle of your social life. You're starting to see some new things come about, but what we understand is that you get older, you get jobs, you get families. Man, it really gets tough, and I'm telling you out of personal experience, it's tough to have this component of my life. And so we're going to give you 4 ways to nurture these. Number 1 is to be intentional. That means that I'm not going to sit back and just kind of wait and say, well, people will come to me. I'm going to go after them. And good begets good. If you go after them, they're going to come back after you, and things are going to go well. So be intentional, make plans, and follow through. That actually leads us into number 2. Number 2 is be available. Listen, when my friends call me and they say, hey, can you have coffee? I need to make that work, because that's a big deal for them, but also for me. So be available and say yes. And when you say yes to something, you have to say no to something else. But definitely side with your friends. Don't skip out on work or class or anything like that, unless it's really, a big emergency kind of thing. But definitely, weigh out the risks and the rewards on those things, and be available when you can. Number 3 is simply to be present. Have you ever walked into a coffee shop and saw a nice little couple sitting in the corner and both of them are on their phone? Well, they're together, but they're not present with each other. And that's a very difficult distraction for all of us, because we're so connected and we have to think about our email or our socials, and we're worried, that we're going to miss something. But what I want you to do is, when you're with people, I want to encourage you to be with people and to really be present in that moment. My greatest fear is that my children will ever have a visual representation of me where this thing is in front of my face. And so I'm going to do my best to not let that happen, but try to be present and then see how things go. The 4th thing is to be good. Listen, you know this and I know this. We're surrounded by enough negativity. So you don't need to apply that negativity to your friend. In fact, what you could do is you could just be optimistic and encourage. And you remember to only give advice when advice is sought, and just try to be there for that person. And, sometimes they do need to hear the hard truth. And I'm not saying don't tell the truth. I'm saying be good to them. Be kind to them. Tell them truth with love. And that will be being good. Our number 3 thing is intellectual health. You're probably all like, I'm totally killing it here because I'm enrolled in a college class, right? That would be intellectual. You're right, it is intellectual. And for most of us, that's a good step. But that's also like saying that enrolling in college is to intellectual health like registering for a race and expecting a trophy or a medal. It doesn't always work that way. There is performance involved, and so with performance, what we have to understand is that this is kind of our ability to both reason and understand. And how does that work? How do we develop that? Well, you could look at a lot of resources. I personally loved what I found here in the Scientific American blog. And so I cite my source here so you can go research this, but this article gave 5 very specific principles to improve your intellectual health, and I love each one of these. Number 1 is to seek new. The thing is when you look for new things to be a part of, you're going to engage differently and your brain is going to rewire to that, and that's a very healthy thing. Another thing is challenge yourself. What we're saying here is to expect it to be kind of difficult, but to also expect to be able to do it. You want to be able to do things and get success out of them, but it does need to be challenging in the first place. Number 3 is to think creatively. We could always go to the resources of YouTube or the internet or a book and find out how to do something. But it's always more rewarding, but also, again, it's more connecting to your brain to learn if you do things in a creative way. We want you to do things the hard way. Oh my goodness, before you leave this class and withdraw, let me just help you understand that doing things the hard way, that's a great way to build resilience. And if you are any part of the psychology world, what you're hearing a lot of is how do we build resilience? And the definite way of doing this is saying, I'm going to go and do this the hard way. The last thing on this list is network. When you are saying, listen, I want to do something, you need to find somebody who's already done it. If you want to be wealthy, you want to follow the habits of wealthy people. If you want to be healthy, you need to follow the habits of healthy people. If you want to be academic, you need to follow the habits of academic people. And so you need a network. You need people who are already doing what they do or what you want to do. For instance, when I decided I wanted to ride my bicycle up Kavanaugh, I took off and I failed miserably and passed out. It was an awful experience that I don't care to relive, but I wasn't done. I really wanted the challenge and I wanted to succeed. And so I found somebody who rode his bike up Kavanaugh a lot. And I asked him, I said, hey, look, I said, would you show me how to do this? Like literally go with me. And he said, yeah, absolutely. What I know is that people are ready to share their knowledge. And if they're not, then they're not people you want in your life. So find those people who are and use them. Not in a bad way, but use them because they want to be used. So he did. He took me up Kavanaugh, and now I can do it by myself. But the first time was awful. And now I learned some things. It changed my brain wiring, and I'm better for it, right? So that's intellectual health. Number 4 is emotional health. This is your ability to handle life's challenges when you're mad, sad, afraid, or happy. Yeah, I did. I kind of messed that up on purpose, but you get the point. What we know is that people kind of experience different emotions based off of different experiences, and probably they're perceived or maybe real, but definitely it changes all the day. And so that's why you're sending emojis to different people about how you feel, and that's a really good start. One of the things that we want to also identify here is anxiety, and anxiety simply being the doubt of reality. And so you do a lot of negative talk to yourself or maybe to others, but definitely to yourself. And then it's a bad habit. Well, we're going to get more into anxiety as we go into the stress module. But for right now, let's just kind of hang in the idea of what our emotions are. Again, happy, sad, mad, afraid, right? So one of the things that I know has helped me more than anything is confessing. Now, I have a lot of people who I see pretty regular at my work life, but the one person that's the standard is my wife. And I try to confess to her as often as my emotions change, because this is a really weak spot for me. And I say, listen, I'm mad, I'm upset, I'm sad, I'm scared about this. And, she usually knows when I'm happy because I kind of show it a little bit differently. But what I've learned is that she then steps in and says, well, let's talk about this. Let's get this emotion worked out. And then I'm safe because it's no longer a secret. And when secrets aren't secrets, they no longer have power. And so we want you to expose those things and to get them out there. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Everybody feels different emotions. That's something that we all know. There was an old saying that used to go by like, don't ever let them see you sweat. I hate this saying. And it's so not true. People need to know you're real. And you need to know you're real. And you need to externalize these emotions and not keep them bottled up. So confess. Number 2 is truth. Ask yourself, is what I'm feeling about this situation true? Is it really true? Could this really be what's going on? And then, again, find out from that person that you trust and love. Say, listen, this is what it's about. And get some truth added in and spilled in to that situation. Number 3 is gratitude. You can always say, listen, this is going bad and it's causing me some anger, but I can be thankful for XYZ. You can always show gratitude and gripiness cannot consume the same space. They just can't do it. So gratitude is always going to trump everything and get you in a better mood because you're thinking about what is good, what is there, what is truth and has happened that is positive for you. Our 4th thing is simply confidence. Look back on your situations of the past and say, I know I got through that. I know I can get through this because that happened and I'm still here. So I've got some, longevity built into this. I've got some hardiness built into this. And again, we're going to talk about this again in the stress module. But think about what did you do then that helped you get to now? Because you certainly survived it. Number 5 is our environmental health. And I want you to know that this is talking very specifically about your relationship with the places you inhabit. And so we're speaking very specifically about your city, your home, and your workplace. And these 3 areas are where you're going to spend most of your time on this earth. And so it is only logical to say that your stewardship of those resources are important. Don't come to my house on any given weekend because you're going to see a massive pile of laundry. Well, I know that. You know that. It's probably happening at your house too, right? But, it's not a healthy place for me to be in. But even worse than that is if I feel like there's a threat to my water quality or my air quality. And the reality is that millions of people, to the tune of 12 million, will die annually because they do have toxicity in the air, in their water, in their food, in their soil, in their toxic, and their home, and in their work. And so you think about certain occupations that maybe will expose you, or you think about certain areas in the world that you could live. I mean, maybe LaFleur County is not the most exciting place, but if you move to a metropolitan area, what are you going to be exposed to? What about the sounds that you're going to hear by living in the city? And they could be gunshots, they could be horns, they could be traffic all the time. I'll take my LaFleur County quietness. So, it's just kind of a really give and take position here. I definitely want you to think about how you can conserve things, how you can clean things, and how you can correct things. And so those are kind of my 3 C's as to how to be better stewards of our environmental health. Our next thing is our spiritual health, and what I'm not talking about is religion here. I'm talking very specifically about spirituality, and this is our ability to say, this is where my beliefs and my values of life come from. Now, some people will say, well, I'm not a spiritual person. Well, your beliefs and values came from somewhere, and so they don't just happen. You're old enough now that they've been natured and nurtured into you, but they came from somewhere. And so it's also about kind of the origin of your life's higher purpose, your meaning, your value. And so somewhere in your mind, you probably need to give attention to that. It's also your moral compass, what tells you what's right and wrong. Certainly the United States government has not just dictated all of that for you. You have your very specific directions coming from somewhere. And so we want you to kind of think about, what is my spiritual health? And, again, what's the thermostat saying about that? Because I can get a flat spot here and that could really get me down the road. And so more to come on that one specifically, because I know that's a little more difficult to grasp for some folks. We want to give you finally the hierarchy of lifespan and health span. What we know is that one that's not mentioned, which is cognitive, is kind of sitting at the top. And cognitive is your ability to think, to remember, and to be clear. In fact, if you were to look at one of the top leading causes of death, known as Alzheimer's disease, it is heavily a cognitive but also a physical decline. What we know is that once cognitive goes, everything else is going to go, because you no longer have the ability to make good choices about the rest of it. And so that's kind of a simplistic way of viewing that, but it is very true. And so physical kind of falls underneath that. You can probably remain fairly intact mentally or cognitively and lose physical health, but still live for a very long time. What we know is that if you lose cognitive health, it doesn't matter what your physical health was, it's going to degrade very quickly. And so another thing to think about is cognitive health is basically branched from your intellectual health, your emotional health, your social health, your financial occupational health, your spiritual health, and your environmental health, all summing up into your physical health and then traveling upwards. So we want you to know cognitive health is kind of an end game. If it goes, everything else is gone. And so that's why something like Alzheimer's is so devastating. What we want you to do now is we want you to tune out of this video, and as you have time, tune into the next one where we're going to address both occupational and financial health. And in the third video, we're going to bring this all together and talk about risk and habits and a lot of fun stuff on how to change but also formulate new ones. I hope you enjoyed this first section of video, and I hope you learned a lot. Make sure you take the quiz, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.